Okay, let's jump right into this explainer. Look, if you're building LLM-assisted apps in the financial sector, whether that's banking, brokerage, or payments, you already know what's on the line. A hallucination here. It's not just some funny little quirk you can brush off. We're talking about a critical, potentially million-dollar failure. So the big question is, how do we actually architect an AI assistant that is governed, reliable, and completely secure? Well, let's break it down.
We've got a really clear roadmap for today. We're going to kick things off with what I call the vector database trap, then dive into knowledge versus transaction planes, routing by intent, guarding the financial state, and finally wrap up with a practical implementation roadmap.
All right, part one, the vector database trap.
So here is the absolute core of the problem. This idea that you can just put everything into a vector database is a terrible, terrible design choice for finance. Think about it. Imagine you're embedding live financial facts, and a user asks for their account balance. If you're relying on vector similarity, the LLM might pull a balance from 3 days ago just because the text happens to be semantically similar. I mean, that is a total audit nightmare. Your authoritative financial statement must absolutely never depend on an asynchronous embedding pipeline or a language model just kind of guessing what a balance should be.
Moving right along to part two, knowledge versus transaction planes.
To fix that track we just talked about, we need to clearly contrast two completely different systems. On one side, we have the knowledge plane. This is where you use RAG for your slow-moving information. Think API contracts, compliance policies, runbooks. Because it's slow, asynchronous indexing is perfectly fine here. But then, on the other side, the transaction plane is an entirely different beast. For this, you need deterministic, live APIs to fetch authoritative facts, no guessing allowed.
We're talking about very specific elements here. Account balances, payment statuses, live risk states. These things demand real-time API retrieval, not semantic search. You literally cannot embed a payment settlement status and expect a vector search to pull it accurately an hour later when the status is already completely changed. It has to be deterministic every single time. Okay, part three, routing questions by intent.
So how do we actually handle those two planes? Well, your gateway has to classify every single user request by intent before it retrieves anything. If a user asks a definitional question like, "What does payment authorized mean?" the gateway routes that straight to the knowledge RAG path. Easy. But if they ask, "What is the status of payment 123?" the router needs to instantly recognize, hey, that's a live transaction request, and hit the live data API. And for complex stuff, like explain these ledger entries, the system actually needs both. It grabs the live data from the API and pairs it with accounting rules from the knowledge RAG to build a perfectly accurate answer.
For that live data, your assistant should always call a strongly typed read-only domain data API. The LLM gets the authoritative response back, which includes the source system and the exact timestamp. And you've got to remember this golden rule. The language model is only there to explain the data. It absolutely must never invent, modify, or calculate anything. It explains facts. It doesn't determine them.
Let's get into part four, guarding the financial state. All right, the absolute non-negotiable requirement here is applying authorization before retrieval. You have to enforce tenant, role, and document-level access before pulling any data. You can't just retrieve highly classified documents and then politely ask the LLM in the prompt to, please keep this a secret. It simply doesn't work like that. Plus, never embed unmasked sensitive data, like social security numbers, in your search index. Tokenize it. Retrieved documents are untrusted input, so your pipeline has to strip active content and enforce tool authorization completely outside the model itself.
And when it comes to tracking your operational metrics, your acceptable unauthorized retrieval rate is exactly zero. Zero. In a governed financial system, there's just no margin for error here. Security always trumps the model's cleverness.
Because you're building an enterprise-grade system, you have to be able to reconstruct an exhaustive audit trail for every single request. You need to know exactly who asked the question, what their specific authorization entitlements were, which exact live systems were queried, and the precise prompt and model used to generate the final text. Oh, and a quick pro tip, do not log unmasked sensitive data just because the model happened to receive it. Your audit trail must be airtight, reproducible, and fully compliant.
Finally, part five, your implementation roadmap.
The real secret to this roadmap is starting small and scaling responsibly. In phase 0, you aren't writing massive ingestion code. No, you're defining your top 5 use cases and your security classifications. Phase 1 is all about validating the concept purely on code and knowledge search. Zero live financial data yet. Phase 2 rolls out production RAG. It's really only in Phase 3 that you introduce live data via that read-only API we discussed. And notice how we're purposely holding off on complex graph retrieval and automated actions until Phases 4 and 5. You only go there after the read-only system is completely bulletproof.
To bring this all together, your ultimate goal is to architect a reliable, tightly governed ecosystem and leave that flawed vector database-only approach in the dust. You start by building a system that accurately answers knowledge questions using curated data. Then, and only then, do you carefully add your authoritative domain data API for those live transaction inquiries. So I want to leave you with a pretty blunt question as you evaluate your own architecture moving forward. Are you just building a single RAG pipeline, or are you building a governed financial assistant? Look, if you just dump ledgers into a vector database, you're going to end up with stale answers and a massive audit nightmare. But if you separate knowledge from transaction, route everything by intent, and enforce strict security protocols, you're actually building an enterprise-grade financial assistant. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and I really hope this blueprint helps your teams build with absolute confidence.